Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this sixth session of the TechNet 21 webinar series on deploying an electronic LMIS, making the right choice. I'm delighted to welcome our guests for this session today, the topic of which is introducing OpenLMIS, LMIS software and services. Today we have with us four panelists: David Crew-Brown, General Manager at Vital Alliance Corporation; Wes Brown, OpenLMIS Senior Technical Manager at Vital Alliance Corporation; Ranil Singh, Principal Consultant for the Supply Chain Solution Division at Imperial Logistics; and Felimone Amone, Mozambique Sales Program Lead at Village Reach. We'll start with an introduction of the tool during the first 15 minutes. Then Felimone will present the Mozambique case study. We'll finish this session with questions and answers. So you can ask your questions during the presentation in the Q&A box or in the chat box. They will be answered by the panelists after the presentation. Don't hesitate to ask your questions. As usual, this session is recorded and we'll share the links to the video as well as the slides by email and on the TechNet 21 website. I'll share the links in the chat while David will start the presentation. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone who's joined us on the call. It's great to have you guys and really appreciate you taking time to meet with us today. As Alex said, we're going to be talking to you a little bit about our story about OpenLMIS, really where it comes from, how what the capabilities are, and then also looking at how a country has actually implemented OpenLMIS. So really great to be spending the time with you all. So maybe for me to get started, just as a bit of background. So as Alex introduced us, my name is David Crew-Brown from Vital Alliance, and really Vital Alliance was born out of a partnership between the One Network organization, which is really largely a big technology provider looking at control tower type technology, and then the logistics provider, Imperial Logistics. And out of those, Vital Alliance was born, and really with a focus of continuing to improve healthcare across Africa and further afield. One of the things that came up as an opportunity for Vital Alliance is indeed the stewardship of OpenLMIS, which really, and we'll talk a bit more about what that means of being a steward of OpenLMIS, but it really provided Vital Alliance with the opportunity to get involved with technology and a solution into the space of stock and inventory management. And you can see there from the map, the complementary implementations. So OpenLMIS currently implemented across about 11 countries and continuing to seek to grow that implementation base. And that's complemented with some activities that we have as Vital Alliance in the market as well. So let's get stuck into understanding a bit more of the product. So overall, you'll see that the guiding principles for us in terms of the product, OpenLMIS, is really based at its heart of saying we've got multiple sources of people contributing, communities contributing, and really trying to establish that community, trying to promote a sense of this is not a product that is based on a single point, but that multiple people get involved. And we talk about a shared investment, shared benefit. So as we continue to invest in the product, we are seeking to invest in such a way and making sure that people build out capability in such a way that it can be shared across the whole community. And so as we expand, we look at finding ways of then further developing and offering that to us as a service. We also pride ourselves in the fact that the system is interoperable, which means that it doesn't provide the full end-to-end solution. You know, OpenLMIS, and we'll go through the details on the next slide of what capabilities OpenLMIS addresses, but it's been built in such a way that it can actually link into quite a few other systems in a interoperable way, that we can actually start ensuring that you get the value from linking up to other systems. And then the last point is that it's that you are able to configure it for your environment. So whatever the case is, either looking at just one medicine program, you can set it up for that, and you can also scale it up and extend it for whatever that specific environment is where you're implementing OpenLMIS. And again, I think Wes will talk a little bit more about that opportunity to scale on multiple bases, but it's been set up in a way that you can do it for a small implementation or a large implementation. So let's have a look at what the features are. Really, I think at the heart, OpenLMIS is for us really, you know, if I look at it, it's really an inventory stock management system that enables countries to move from really a manual paper-based environment. And many of the countries that do implement OpenLMIS are currently doing all their stock management based on sort of the manual paper-based solution. And this allows them the transition point onto an electronic platform. And OpenLMIS provides that platform. And you can see the functionality that we provide, requisitions, being able to generate an order requisition. There are automatic components to generating an order, so you don't have to calculate it, but the system can help calculate it. But from the time that you generate the order, the whole workflow to get it approved and get the order to start being fulfilled. Then there's an order fulfillment component, the pick, pack, ship type of approach, where that's part of the system, as well as the proof of delivery. And then, of course, the order receiving on the other end. There's also the inventory management component where you can just visualize the data. So partly capturing your stock on hand and being able to see how your stock is moving through the facilities in your network, but also be able to start getting the visibility. And that's the analytics and reporting platform that we have. So you can start visualizing the data, start making better decisions around where you've got excess stock, where you've got where you're stocking out on a regular basis, and what you can do to make changes. More recently, there's mobile integration, and we've part of the next version release, there will be a mobile component of OpenLMIS, but really looking at how does one integrate with mobile technology, and also be able to start offering that as part of OpenLMIS, because some environments, you actually don't have the full capability to have the electronic computers potentially available, but there's lots of mobile tech out in the market, and really leveraging that for OpenLMIS. And then finally, probably a smaller component of OpenLMIS, but looking at your tracking of equipment, and in this case, cold chain equipment was functionality that was built in with some capability as we link into other systems of providing alerts and device temperatures, etc. So those are all part of the offering that we have. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Wes, who'll be talking a little bit more about the technical details.
Thanks very much, David. And good day, everybody. So as David was mentioning, that system is very configurable, and to the point where configurability is almost another feature that we could include in what OpenLMIS does. And when we talk about configuration, I want to make sure it's clear the difference between what we call configuration and customization. OpenLMIS is intended to be very configurable. You can also be customized, but the difference between the two is that configuration can be done by a super user or somebody who has experience understanding how the system works, versus customization would require a developer. And obviously customization then is much more expensive, because you have to pay a development team to do this work, and do all your checking and all that kind of stuff. So OpenLMIS is intended to be able to be configured without requiring a development team behind it to make it work in your scenario. And it can be configured on all of these different data elements, whether you're working with one program or many programs, whether you have a very deep and hierarchical structure within your facilities, coming from, let's say, a district to a facility or a few facilities, or all the way up to a whole national scale. And I won't go through each one of these, but the point is that OpenLMIS can scale to small networks of facilities all the way up to whole national scale rollouts. And it's been used primarily on the larger side of things in terms of national scale rollouts, and it works fine in that scenario. But when you have a smaller setup, it can work in that scenario as well. And it's built from the ground up to be able to support these varied setups. And it also allows you to grow your usage. Some of our customers will start with one program. For example, some have started with COVID in this time, and then are branching out into other programs after they get their head around OpenLMIS and their staff become familiar with the platform. It's something that you can grow into over time. Next slide, please. David also mentioned about interoperability, and this is an area where OpenLMIS is intended to fit into an e-health architecture. So most countries, most major health networks are going to have some kind of set of systems that they use to manage the overall health information systems that they have. So there might be things like DHIS2 or some kind of ERP like Epicor. It could also be a warehouse management system. Usually there's some kind of medical record system involved. And then increasingly there's systems to help with the exchange of metadata and master data, such as like a facility registry. And OpenLMIS will work with all of these systems. And we have an overall approach for this where we try to utilize existing standards. And when standards don't exist, we try to work with groups to create them. So the technical architect behind OpenLMIS has been heavily involved in OpenHIE and working to create the standards needed there for the information exchange related to products and to facilities. We do have numerous integrations with DHIS2, live integrations with DHIS2. That's a very major one, as well as integrations with Epicor and OpenSRP that are all up and running right now. We also have an integration with One Network, which David mentioned earlier. A very, very robust supply chain system. So OpenLMIS is intended to fit very well into the eHealth architecture. It also will leverage systems like OpenHIM and other standards-based systems to help mediate between the various systems that are involved there. Next slide, please. So on the reporting and visualization side of things, OpenLMIS can be consumed, the data from OpenLMIS can be consumed by many different systems. We include one out of the box called Apache Superset, which is another open source product, which OpenLMIS also is an open source product. However, we have other implementations that use things like Power BI, so the data can be consumed by many different things. The example of the charts that we're seeing here on this slide, this comes from Apache Superset, and it shows some of the basic kinds of visualizations that you can create with that tool. By default, we include the reports listed here. You can see they're mostly focused on requisitions and stock management related data, but you can create your own as well. But one of the big powers of Apache Superset is that you have the ability to customize these, we call them dashboards because these reports don't generally just have one data element. They're showing many different visualizations, and you can customize those to show specific slices of the data. So maybe looking at just one district or looking at many different data elements, or slicing up that data elements however you might want it. But you can do that on the fly, meaning that you can, as a user, you can create these filters very easily, but as an administrator, you can create specific reports that meet exactly your needs without having to have a SQL developer come in and write you some custom code to do so. So it's intended to be very easy to use. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, David, thanks. On the open and extensible side of things, I just mentioned this previously, how OpenLMIS is an open source project. And sometimes you'll hear that, and it's not exactly clear what that means. And in our case, we try to take to heart that open and extensible nature of an open source project. So we haven't just released the source code. We haven't just made it a public project. We really have a community behind the OpenLMIS project. It's open source, obviously, in terms of the source code that we create, but it's also open in terms of our community. So we have meetings monthly or weekly, depending on the meeting, that anybody can join. We have an open Slack group that people can join. We try to be as community-driven as possible when it comes to decision-making, so that what we're building is not just something that we build that we think we need, but it's also built based on what the community is telling us they want. That also comes into the kind of standards that we work with. So leveraging things like FHIR, leveraging existing standards in the web like REST web services for those of you that are more technically inclined. And then once again, making sure that all of our information that we have in terms of how to configure the system, how to use the system, all of that is on our documentation. So it's on our, the docs.openlmis.org website. And much of our community discussions happen openly as well on that forum.openlmis.org website. This also extends then into the architecture, where we have the background of OpenLMIS. And I won't go into too much detail here, but I'm happy to talk about this separately. It uses containerized microservices as the development approach, which allows us to be able to incorporate other work as implementation work is done without having to change the core system. It helps us be much more modular. As I mentioned before, we try to interact with other systems via REST, which is a very common, simple protocol. And we have a lot of examples for how to get started if you want to get involved. And one of the main questions we tend to get when we're talking to groups of people that might be interested in OpenLMIS is, what do you need to do an implementation? Well, an implementation would be an installation of OpenLMIS. We say country readiness here because very often it's used at a country level, but it doesn't have to be. So this is really, country or organizational readiness. And really it's one of the main overall critical pieces is having organizational buy-in, making sure that, you have your key leaders who are bought into the idea that this software is important and the processes that it's going to support are valid or are valued. So, that overall, that is just a critical component. Then once we dive down into some of the other pieces, it's making sure that you understand how are the processes going to be built into OpenLMIS? What are the processes that need to be created? Understanding the requirements organizationally first, so that you can then share them with others so that it's clear exactly what needs to be built. And also making sure that you're paying attention to what needs to happen for OpenLMIS after the initial implementation. So that includes things like support, tier 1, tier 2 support, ongoing training, things like that. On the environment side of things, you need to make sure that you have standard operating procedures, that you've thought about how OpenLMIS will fit into your eHealth architecture, and all the rest of the things listed here. I won't go through them individually, but you can see there's basics that just need to be in place. One thing I will highlight though is that OpenLMIS is a web-based system, so that 3G connectivity is important. However, OpenLMIS does support intermittent offline support, meaning that if you go offline while you're doing something, for most of the activities related to requisitions and stock management, you'll be able to continue working, and then your data will sync up once you're back online again. Back to you, David.
Thanks, Wes. And just to add to that is that I think often when one looks at a solution like a technology solution like OpenLMIS, you think that that's your silver bullet. But I think to Wes's point is that really needing to do the upfront work in getting your process right can then be enabled with the technology of moving from a paper-based to an electronic system. But it's not necessarily that you must try and do it the other way around. So don't try and fix the process with the system, rather get your process right and then implement the system. So really what were Vital Lines asked to do was one of the key things was around making sure that OpenLMIS is sustainable. It was developed by the donor funding over a period of time, but they then approached Vital Lines to see how do we make sure that this product does become sustainable and we can ensure the future of OpenLMIS. And really our focus areas to do that is, one is to maintain that open and extensible design. So being able to continue building onto the back of what we have at the moment and making sure that people can contribute to it. So maintaining that environment. Our second focus really about building the community. And I think the point here is that we're stronger together. As we continue to build, as contributions come in from the different countries, our responsibility as a steward is to make sure that those contributions are given in such a way that they can be built into the core product and shared to other countries that are using OpenLMIS. And through that, the product becomes stronger and we actually get an improved product over a period of time. Also to support the implementing partners, often project like this, implementation like this, you need people who can actually be walking next to the Department of Health, the Ministry of Health, who's implementing something, or the company. It can be used in public or private sector, but really working with the implementing partner. And we see our responsibility of really supporting them, showing them the roadmap, and to a large extent making sure that the lessons and mistakes that have been made in the past don't get made again. So one is able to help provide that bit of, I suppose, support and visibility. I think really lastly on the slide here is around the post-implementation and realizing that software systems that are implemented also need to make sure that they are maintained. One is that you have your in-country support for challenges that people might have in terms of user concerns and issues. So to support that from our point of view, but then also to your kind of level 4 support, which we talk largely about, maintaining your core software, looking at your bug fixes, providing that implementation guidance that we were talking about, development guidance if you're wanting to do new development, and then providing new releases on a regular basis into the community is all part of what Vital Alliance needs to do as level 4 support and continuing to sustain OpenLMIS. Of course, that does come at a cost to us, and because this is no longer donor funded, there are some points where you'll have to, there are some fees involved with some of that support, but I think the community is aware of your typical level 1 to 3 support, and then we've got what we call enterprise support on the back end of that. We're now going to go from what we would say maybe a bit of a theoretical discussion to hearing from our colleague Philemone Amone from Village Reach, who will be talking to us about a specific implementation example for Mozambique. So I'm going to hand over and thank you to Philemone for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wes and David. Thank you. So I will start by introducing myself. My name is Philemone, and I'm managing the implement itself, which is the implementation of OpenLMIS in Mozambique. So giving a bit of background, the implementation of SELF started in 2014 in just one province of Cabo Delgado in the northern region of Mozambique. And after that, it was scaled up to 8 provinces. SELF was mainly development to support the dedicated logistics system, which was direct delivery from the province warehouse to the health facilities. And this is where one of the key issues with that implementation started, because the OpenLMIS solution, which was a very earlier version of OpenLMIS, was developed to address that specific point. So as time went by, new requirements appeared, the technology evolved. So there was a need to upgrade SELF to address those limitations that we were encountering during that process. So in 2018 to 19, we started a gap analysis, which was mainly focused in trying to see why the SELF was not having the performance that we expected, what was the solutions that were available, what was the direction that the country aimed to go. So looking at all of that, OpenLMIS v3 became the obvious solution. So we proceeded with the upgrade of SELF to OpenLMIS v3 in 2019 with the support of Gavi, from the Ministry of Health and UNICEF. So next slide, please. So in terms of how the implementation was designed, we aimed to roll out SELF in four provinces initially, and after that we'll scale up to the whole country. But due to the issue that we're having in data visibility, and after carefully analyzing the solution, the country saw that OpenLMIS was the ideal solution. So it would be better to have the solution implemented in the entire country, so we could have data visibility in the entire country. Because at this stage, OpenLMIS addressed all of the APIs concerns, because OpenLMIS self-adjusted deals with vaccines logistics. So OpenLMIS addressed all of the APIs concerned, which have the requisition workflow, the stock management, the inventories, which were features that were not present in the first iteration of Self. So because of that, the ministry requested us as implementing partners to scale up the solution a little bit faster. So by the end of January 2021, we finished the scaling up of Self to all provinces of Mozambique, once again with the support of Gavi, UNICEF, and also the Ministry of Health. Next slide, please. So once the COVID pandemic started, there was a need to find a solution to manage COVID vaccine. So the obvious solution was Self, because it was already managing the routine vaccines. So the country selected OpenLMIS or Self to continue to manage the COVID vaccines. So in March, we received the first shipment of vaccines, so we configured the OpenLMIS to address those aspects of COVID. We added a COVAX program, we added the necessary changes to the facilities to specify which facilities would manage COVID vaccines, all the workflows. And we have done all that, and all the provinces and this started using Self to manage COVID vaccines. One of the things that were noticed at this stage was that one thing that was mentioned in the call, the vaccination of COVID were also happening at the health facility level. So in order to address that, the development of a mobile application started, so we could have data visibility for COVID. I think as Mozambique, as all the other countries, have a very high interest in having COVID data readily available. So we are very happy to see that the core team is also deploying a mobile application. So thank you. Next slide, please. So in order to improve data visibility, we created dashboards inside OpenLMIS. These dashboards were developed in an interactive way. We talk with the end user, we talk with different stakeholders, what is the data that they wanted to see. We look at the international standards, we look at various dashboards for multiple countries to come up with a dashboard to allow users to see data. So as was mentioned, the OpenLMIS allows data to be ingested by different platforms. So in the specific case of Mozambique, we are using Power BI, which is a great advantage to us. And also there is different partners that are working on data visibility that we are providing Self data directly to the system. And we continue to provide support to end users. We know that we cannot implement and forget. One of the key issues of information systems that many times we implement and forget. We deploy the system and then we forget. We do not provide the end users the necessary support, the challenge to address challenges. So we are continuously doing that in order to improve the uptake of the system, data quality, etc. And also we are now working into integrating Self with RTMs. So once again, reiterating this feature of OpenLMIS of be highly interoperable with other systems, because we want as a country to have cold chain data available in Self. So we are working and we expect that by the end of this year, we will have not just logistics information, but also temperature monitoring information within Self. Next slide, please. So what are the key lessons that we learn in our close to seven years journey? So one of the things that's implemented is that we were working, when COVID started, we were working in a low information environment because the vaccines, we were receiving the shipments in a very small batches. So the target groups were changing because there was all the environment was very dynamic. So we usually, when we want to configure a system, we request the information to be provided to us beforehand, so we can configure the system. But unfortunately, in the scenario that we were due to COVID, this scenario was very dynamic. So there were some requests that we made to simplify the administration mechanism that OpenLMIS provide, and the core team promptly provided that. And this goes back to what was previously stated here, that the sharing and collaborating is a key aspect of OpenLMIS. We were able to identify some aspects of OpenLMIS that needed, as a country, we needed improvements, and we were able to provide that back to the core team. And we, as the implementing parts, are very happy to know that some of the requests that we as a country made are now being implemented into the OpenLMIS product, and other countries will benefit from that. And I think this is a great, one of the main advantages of OpenLMIS. So in terms of the other key lesson that we learn in this stage is that the adoption of information systems requires greater enforcement. So once again, we cannot implement and forget and provide just support. We need to create mechanisms, SOPs to, I will not use the word force, but to incentivize end users to submit data, to use the system in the day-to-day, because this is what allows better data with accurate data and complete data, which when we implement systems, then we need to analyze that data. One of the issues that is the system works, but the data is not there. So these are the key lessons that we learn in this process of implementing OpenLMIS in country.
Thank you, Filimone. And Alex, hopefully that helps, give a bit of an overview of OpenLMIS, give you a sense of how it was used in a country. As the participants will see that OpenLMIS has also been translated into other languages, so not just available in English, but also in Portuguese and French. So yeah, hopefully that's been a helpful introduction, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Filimone, and thank you also, Wes, for this presentation. You can already ask your questions in the Q&A box. I have a first question. Someone would like to know about the deployment and training of users for an OpenLMIS rollout. Perhaps, Filimone, you can tell us about your experience.
Sorry, come again. I couldn't understand the questions.
Yes, information about the deployment and training of users for OpenLMIS rollout, for the rollout.
So the deployment for OpenLMIS, the version 3, we train not just the end users, but also, when I say the end user, I mean mostly the logisticians, but we also train the M&E team. And the trainings were most, as David mentioned and very well, is we didn't try to fix the processes. We didn't try to fix the process with the systems. So we aimed at having users that understand very well the processes. So understanding the system was quite easy because it follows the exact process of the API in country. So this allowed us to not spend a lot of time in process, but more time understanding how the system works. So we trained close to 200 users, maybe a little bit more, but 200 is the number of permanent users. But there is also M&E team across multiple levels and organizations that were also trained with self. I don't know if I addressed the question.
I think so, but if someone would like more details, you can ask.
I can add a little bit to that, Alex,
sure,
before we move on.
Go ahead.
So in general, if you're looking from a technical perspective, the deployment of OpenLMIS is built around Docker images. So you can tie those together fairly easy. We have we call it the reference application to tie together all the various microservices, which are each independent Docker containers. So the deployment of OpenLMIS can actually be very, very simple in terms of how to get it up and running, because it's built from the ground up to be able to support that containerized type of deployment model. So from a technical perspective, that's the way that you do it. And upgrading even is actually very simple as a result as well.
Great, thank you for this. Thank you, Wes. Next question. What are the challenges likely to be faced during the eLMIS deployment? So perhaps, Felimone, you can tell us about your experience, and David, Wes, perhaps you can tell us about, you can add additional information from experience in other countries. Felimone, the challenges faced during the deployment.
So the main challenge, I think, is process. Not I will talk. It's processes that are not very clear. I think this is the main challenge, because when we configure OpenLMIS, we aim it to address a specific scenario. Yes, it's configurable, but we aim it to address a specific scenario. So one of the key challenges that we face, sometimes the information is not always available. For example, we can have a specific approval system, and when we start to use this system, users say that this is not actually the correct approval workflow. So we need to go back and reconfigure the system, which sometimes implicates going back to the users and inform of those changes. So I think the main challenge that needs to be addressed is to make sure that we have a comprehensive information about how we want the systems to work, provide clarification about the processes that OpenLMIS is trying to address. The other issues we have is these are issues that I see as more straightforward to address, such as connectivity issue, ensuring that users have the necessary resource to access OpenLMIS. But the main big issue I would say that is have very clear process and complete information.
Thank you, Felimone. David, Wes, would you like to add something perhaps from your experience in other settings? David, Wes, you're on mute if anyone wanted to answer.
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add from my side is just the upfront data collection and the upfront data availability. So to configure OpenLMIS, you need to make sure that you've got all those data components available and get them set up into the system. And often that does become a challenge to get all the right master data. Sometimes the master data is not that well maintained in a specific environment, and then it actually takes a lot of effort to try and make sure you get the right formularies and the right medicine descriptions, etc., that can be uploaded. So that's just another component to consider.
Yeah, and one additional thing I would add too is that as much as possible, you want to try to limit the amount of customization that you need to make to OpenLMIS or really to any software platform. Oftentimes when you're doing a first implementation of OpenLMIS, especially if you're coming from a paper-based system, it makes much more sense to just try and get OpenLMIS up and running with just configuration as required by your implementation, to set up your programs and your facilities and all that, the master data that David was just mentioning. And try to use that as is to see how does the system work? How does it fit into the processes that you currently have, or maybe the processes that you want to have? And then over time, decide, okay, what are the key areas that it actually makes sense to invest time and money into to make changes? One of the things we often see is that countries especially are very interested in, they have these key features that they think that they want, and they will invest lots and lots of time and resources to make those things happen, only to find out that users actually don't really use them very much. And that wasn't perhaps the best use of resources. So that this is not specific to OpenLMIS, to be honest. This is just kind of a general advice for deployment of a new system. Thanks.
That's great info. Thank you, Wes. And while we were discussing the challenges in various settings, some participants would like to know in which countries you have your tool has been implemented, and how far has OpenLMIS been deployed in Africa? David?
Yeah, so I can take that one, Alex. So you'll see that from the map here, the light blue is where
We don't see the map.
system has been implemented. So we've got implementations, Mozambique.
David, your connection I think is bad. I don't know if you can hear me. We don't see the map. Can you go back to the map? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry.
That's great. Yes, we can see it. Thank you. You can carry on.
Since David's having some problems, I don't mind jumping in here.
Yes, go ahead, please.
There's a number of different countries in sub-Saharan Africa primarily that have used a version of OpenLMIS. There's different versions kind of going back actually many years. There are right now are 3, soon to be 5 there's 4, soon to be 6 implementations that are running the very current version. There are let's see, I'm trying to think of the version 2 countries. There's at least, I think, 4 or so. So I'm trying to do this off the top of my head. Nonetheless, all of these countries are in sub-Saharan Africa. They're all national scale implementations of some programs, so not all programs. So they might be, for example, focused on HIV/AIDS, MCH, and essential medicines, but not doing TB, for example. But for the most part, they're handling countrywide deployments of those commodities. Let's see, the other piece of that then, I think that David might have been alluding to, is also the one network side of things and the countries there that they support, which the reason we bring them up is because now we're kind of all part of the same organization. I don't know enough about those countries to highlight which ones those are without the map. So Alex, I don't know if I got to your question well or not.
Yes, I see Felimone would like to add something.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So just what was said is that Mozambique have 2 implementation of OpenLMIS. One is the ESL, which we presented here to manage vaccines, and we have another implementation, but it's under different organization, as Wes well said, that there can be multiple implementation of different organization that handles essential medicine, which is called CIBLUSH.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I don't know if David is back with us, because the next question might be for him. Otherwise, Wes, you might be able to answer that. How much does it cost to deploy this tool? Someone would like also to know about the pricing model for a countrywide deployment.
Yeah, hopefully I'm back. Can you hear me fine, Alex?
Yes, great.
Sorry about my connectivity to the community on the call. So I apologize. I think it's how long is a piece of string, Alex? It's not an easy question to answer. It depends on the complexity and the scale of the implementation. So as we've mentioned, as Wes kind of gave feedback, is that OpenLMIS it's open source. It's a free to use software, but there are costs to customize it and set it up and maintain it going forward. And so I think there's this component that people can use it as part of the open source environment, but to get it properly configured, up and running, and get it set up in a way that it actually meets your requirements is an effort, and that depends on how much resource you're prepared to put in as a country to get it up and running, what the quality is of your current environment in terms of master data and all those components. And then there are, of course, ongoing maintenance support costs that will have to be considered, both for the in-country support, and if you can get that up and running in the Ministry of Health or in your organization, then that's first prize over a period of time. And then there's the support that we provide as Vital Alliance. At the moment, we're providing that support at a cost of around $25,000 per year, which we call enterprise support. And that's really just to keep the product sustained through the longevity of the product. But I think in terms of implementation, it's very hard. And I think, Wes, I don't know if there's anything to chip in, but it's not a single answer that one can give around that.
Yeah, I think you hit on the key component there is that for OpenLMIS, there's no license fees. You can add 10 users or 1,000 users. There's no license fees for OpenLMIS, but it does take money to be able to implement any kind of software solution in a country. that are completely separate from license fees. As the core team, the enterprise support piece is actually vitally important to be able to support your implementation partner or the country or organization that's doing the implementation. And so that piece is not required, but it's really helpful to have a successful implementation.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you, David. I think Pranil wanted to add that concerning the previous question, that OpenLMIS between V2 and V3 is live in 12 African countries, and that excludes current opportunities. So you actually answered a question about the subscription, and so the next question is actually, I don't know if you can really answer that one, but we never know how to lobby the government to apply for an eLMIS software. How can governments be persuaded to adopt this new supply chain management system? So basically, how can professionals and managers, perhaps in countries, I don't know if anyone would like to say something on that, but you can also pass if you don't feel comfortable answering this question. Felimone?
Thank you. I think I can start with and provide a bit of experience for Mozambique.
This is great.
I think the key question is always start with a problem. So we need to look at the country and try to understand what's the problem that the country is having in regards to logistics information systems. So if we have that information, if we analyze this is the problem that the country have, we can look for a solution that will address specifically those problems. Because many times what happens is sometimes we come with a solution that does not address a specific problem. So we discovered that after 2, 3, 5 years, the problem still exists, and a lot of resources were used to address a problem that people don't understand. So my advice is always start with a problem, because when you have a problem, you can really go to the government and say, this is the problem that you are having, and the government knows very well what's the problem that they are having, and this is the solution, and this is how this solution addresses that problem. So when we present in that way to the government, they are very much open to see, okay, the solution that you are providing is good, so let's now see how it behaves on the field. So my 2 cents is this: always start with a problem, and it's very important to understand the environment where we want to deploy the solution, because this is another aspect. For example, we need to know the reach of the solution. We can have a very good solution, but only fit for urban areas. This is not the case of OpenLMIS. I'm just talking in general, for example. So we need to understand the landscape of the country where the solution is going to be implemented, and if our solution will have the necessary scale. So as I said, one of the things that prompted the government to ask us to do a massive scale up in a very short amount of time was because they saw that the problem that they were having, OpenLMIS itself could address. And they were not keen on waiting for 6, 7, 8 months until we had implementing partners identify funders to scale up the solutions. They say that, okay, we will scale up ourselves, we just need your technical support.
Thank you very much, Felimone, for this detailed answer. Next question: how can the software manage the warehouses and the vaccines? Well, that's you replied a bit, but about warehouse management, anything you'd like to say?
I'm happy to answer that one, or at least give a response to that one. This actually, I think, gets back to the integration within with OpenLMIS into other systems. Now, OpenLMIS is not a warehouse management system. It can be able to do basic fulfillment of orders. If you have either no system or some other system that you're using for warehouse management, it can do the basics of it. But really, if you're looking for a warehouse management system, you should find a warehouse management system or an ERP, something like that. OpenLMIS will fit very well into integrating with those kind of systems, and OpenLMIS will do what it does well. but it is not intended to be a warehouse management system.
Thank you. Next question. Does OpenLMIS cover medical labs? Anyone, perhaps Wes?
I'm happy to answer that. I feel like I'm talking too much. So does it cover medical labs? It will cover the commodities associated with medical labs. So if you're keeping track of your reagents and whatever other commodities might be used in your lab, it will handle that. It's not going to do the lab management in terms of keeping track of orders that are coming in and the status and results of those lab orders. But it can do the inventory side of things. Same thing for the pharmacy, quite frankly. That's its focus area, the requisitions and in the stock management components of the health system. Actually, it doesn't not have to be the health system, but right now it's being used in that context. So the answer is yes, sort of, but also no, depending on exactly what the questioner was asking regarding lab management systems.
Thank you, Wes. Next question. How to implement sustainable LMIS in countries with limited resources? That's a broad question. Does anyone want to say something about it? Perhaps David or Pranal?
Yeah, I think Alex, it's a great question and something that we're continuously asking ourselves as well, is how do we ensure that one can scale the implementation of OpenLMIS across multiple countries and provide that functionality and capability for countries that are still operating without an electronic logistics management information system. But yeah, I think at the moment there's no easy answer to that. I think if a country is prepared to put resources behind the implementation, which of course that also costs money, but if they do have resources, then they could potentially help cut down the cost of an implementation. But at the end of the day, it's worth spending. It's almost the adage of saying you saving money now is going to cost you money later. So if one doesn't do a proper setup, then actually the use of OpenLMIS will be less useful in the long run, if that makes sense. So I think there are ways and means of trying to continuously improve that. And we are working at some ideas around trying to establish an easier, faster implementation. One of the things that maybe is linking to what Philemon said is that for what we call rapid deployment or OpenLMIS, one can actually reduce the scope of the implementation to something like COVID. And for that, you can then, do a more rapid deployment, which can come at a lower cost. And then over time, I think one of the things that Wes said earlier on is over time, you can then expand the functionality, expand the groups of medicine that you want to manage with OpenLMIS, and in that way, it's not a significant heavy burden from the start, but over time, you'll be able to continue investing in getting the rest of your medicine portfolio onto OpenLMIS.
So just to add on to that, though, the implementation component, I think typically is always donor funded. From what we've seen, and that's for good reason, is, as David is saying, is to get the right foundation in place in terms of the architecture, the design, and the training of, most importantly, the training of the users of the application and that knowledge within the various ministries. The other question becomes, in terms of sustainability, the funding for those people that you would probably need to bring on to actually run the system, if you don't already have those in place, and then also continual training mechanisms within the country itself. So how is that transferred into the country, and how is that maintained within the country? So that's another area where resources would come into play, at least from a government perspective. But typically the initial implementation you would need some level of expertise to support the country to actually get this off the ground. And that's our implementation partners from an OpenLMIS perspective. And generally, we found that the donors are quite gracious in terms of helping countries out with that.
Excellent, thank you, Pranil. So I have three more questions. So if anyone would like to ask more questions, you have just a few minutes left. How can we improve eLMIS for an end-to-end data visibility? Anyone would like to take this question? I think it's a general question, I guess, about eLMIS products. No one would like to take this question? Wes?
Wes, go for it. I'll add to it.
Okay.
Okay.
So OpenLMIS, as it's currently positioned, is really good at being able to keep track of the commodities down to a facility level and being able to roll that data up so that you can get a broad perspective all the way down to the individual perspective. It's good on the distribution of commodities out to facilities and seeing what they have on hand. The piece that I think One Network provides is the other side of things, the supplier side of things, being able to get that perspective of what needs to come into the country, what is the interval that needs to come in, what's in your warehouses, what's being, what are the calculations that you can do to be able to figure out exactly how much you should be sending to each region or to each facility. OpenLMIS does do some of those calculations, but they're basic because we don't have that perspective of the upstream data visibility. So really what I think, the full answer to that question is that you need to be able to see what you have on the ground and what the requests that are coming in are, which OpenLMIS handles well, but you also need to be able to see the other side of things and be able to pair those two together, which I think is what the value add that combining One Network and OpenLMIS can provide. David, on to you to add more context.
Yeah, I think, one needs to realize that there's not many systems that are one size fits all that can do all functionality. There are some out there. I think your One Networks of this world are systems where they have that full range capability, but OpenLMIS provides a very good starting point for your automated inventory / stock management. And in there, it's very good visibility and control of your inventory, of your stock. So you can almost at any point in time see what stock is available. So from a end-to-end visibility of your inventory in your country, you'll be able to see kind of at facility, at product level, what your current stock on hand is, again, depending on how well the system gets used by those facilities. And I think to Wes's point, as one goes up the maturity of supply chain functionality, as you're wanting to get more visibility into inbound logistics or into your kind of long-term projected demand forecast, then you start integrating with other systems. And a great example is the One Network integration. But I think there's a whole lot of opportunities to integrate between OpenLMIS and other systems to give you that broader end-to-end view. But from a stock visibility point of view, OpenLMIS provides good capability.
Thank you. Next question. Someone would like to know if you've reached Pacific areas. Pranil, perhaps you would like to answer that one.
No, I don't believe so. I think at this stage, the footprint is limited to Africa. There are a few conversations, I think, in South America at the moment, but nothing in terms of the Pacific.
Thank you. And maybe a last question, and this one is quite broad. What are the new trends in LMIS? And someone would like also to know about what you think about future technology disruptions for eLMIS systems. So perhaps David, you would like to say something about that. I think all of you can have a say. Let's go. That's the final minutes. David?
Yeah, I think for me, the future is to, if one thinks about the space, we need to move from having no data visibility, having no information, and manual stock management, and sort of very cumbersome, potentially long lead times type of operations. We need to move towards the future of enabling that with technology. And OpenLMIS is a great starting point in our view, that you can actually get going with good stock management, with good visibility, and better managing your inventory, and that way providing better patient service and providing an improved cost for the specific country. So definitely support the journey. I think in the future, we look at building out OpenLMIS and integrating, continuing the integration journey with other systems to provide higher level services into the different countries.
And Alex, was part of the question too also the understanding the difference between just OpenLMIS and LMIS?
That's another question, but please go ahead.
Okay, well, I do want to address that because I think it's really important, and that is that the open nature of OpenLMIS means that if in the future, if you've implemented OpenLMIS and your implementation provider no longer exists or is not able to take your contracts, you actually have something because the source code is open, because the work that's done is open, because our community is open, that you can take and be able to leverage with another partner if you're interested in that. One of the things that we've seen in other areas is sometimes, especially with smaller companies, if they decide that they're no longer interested in your business, then you might be stuck with a solution you can no longer support or no longer maintain. Open source, beyond having the license free and the ethos around providing, working together, the shared benefit model that David was alluding to at the very beginning of our presentation, it also has, it's a bit of a safety mechanism. And we've seen that come up many different times. So it's something that we believe pretty strongly in, and that we think can be a benefit both to us as how we build software, but also for the customers as they're using it. Thanks.
Thank you, Wes. Philemon, you wanted to add something?
I don't know if I have just 1 minute.
We can take a few, like 1 or 2 more minutes. Let's go.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to address your question for what you see in the new technology disruption where LMIs are going. I will give this perspective of based on the experience that we are having in country. One of the things that I see that is crucial is to reduce the data burden for data entry. So I see that any breakthroughs that we have in ways to automate the process of entering data, let's say automated mechanisms to, let's say, scan a product as it arrives in a warehouse and that be automatically added to the lot, because this will allow to reduce the data burden at the technicians, so they can use the activities to better analyze data, so reduce the amount of time spent in entering data, so they will have more time to analyze data. And the other key thing that I would see as a greater improvement will be automated decisions or suggestions. So I foresee a system that based on the consumption, based on the time of the year, based on a multitude of factors, would suggest this may reside within OpenLMIS or be another system that pulls data from OpenLMIS to make suggestions. Because one of the problems is that we create dashboards, we allow data to be visible, but then what? And having data available doesn't directly means that people are going to take decisions with that data. So data can be available. There is a lot of work in making sure that data is available, but I think we should also automate to the better extent that we can the process of decision making. So instead of showing a chart, show a decision. Please provide this amount of vaccines or products to this facility because this facility is going to run out of stock in the next 2 months. So things like that. These are technology that, from a very personal point of view, I see are quite needed in the country and also in the world.
Thank you, Philemon. We are 5 minutes past. It's 4:05 here in Geneva. Pranil, I give you 1 last minute if you want to add something about the disruptions and the technology, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that so in the private sector, so we're fortunate that we obviously work in the private sector as well, and whatever trends you see developing there, it would be good that all of that IP and advancement can eventually make its way into these public healthcare supply chains. So things like artificial intelligence and automation. There's a lot of stuff that I think is available at the moment, but you always need a solid base, and that's what OpenLMIS provides. It gives you that solid base, the first step to systemization and foundational information, and then hopefully we can build on top of that through the integrations to the more sophisticated type functionality. But that is the vision, I guess.
Thank you very much, Pranil, for these last words. I think, well, we've answered actually all the questions. So I would like to thank our panelists for their time and engagement, and thank you very much for staying a bit longer. As a reminder, we'll send everyone the links to the recording as well as the slides by email. They will also be made available on the TechNet21 website. You can also register to our next session next week with DHIS2. Let me share the link in the chat so you can register now. And well, thanks again, and we hope to see you next week with DHIS2. Have a good rest of the day. Stay safe. Bye. And thank you, Wes, Pranil, David, and Felimone. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.